Welcome home. Okay, so we can officially start. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar that is jointly organized by CeSPI and the European Forum for Democracy and Solidarity. Today we're going to discuss the economic and political architecture of the European institution and how it may evolve under different enlargement scenarios. I am Sabina Silva. I will be your moderator, and here with me we have Federico Baccini from the New Union Post and Anna Milinkovic from SEP Belgrade. So the discussion will be based on an original contribution by Federico Baccini for CeSPI, which will be shortly available both on the CeSPI website and EFDS website. So if we are ready, we can start. I will start with you, Federico, because I would like to have a general framework of the discussion. Because in your paper, you make a distinction between two different scenarios. So a consolidation scenario that is limited only to the Western Balkans, and what you call a global transformation scenario, which includes also Ukraine. So if you can briefly explain these two different concepts.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. Yeah, as you mentioned, Sabina, thank you to you. In the paper, I've distinguished between two possible paths for the future of the European Union and the future of EU enlargement, as a new wave of enlargement could have a different implication depending on which countries are involved and we consider. So we have on one side a consolidation scenario. So this would concern only the six Western Balkan countries. And it represents a relatively low friction integration of a region that is already geographically surrounded by the European Union and closely tied to the EU on the economical level. So these six countries together account for less than 1% of the EU total GDP. So their accession would mainly, let's say, formalize existing trade relationship and remove the administrative border delays that currently increase logistic costs. On the other side, we have a global transformation scenario that includes also Ukraine alongside with Moldova and Georgia, but Ukraine is the core actor. And this scenario would significantly shift the EU center of gravity eastwards, because Ukraine is a systemic actor whose integration would substantially reshape the European Union strategy position, not only on the defense and security level, but also on the economical level, considering, for example, the agricultural sector, the scale of the reconstruction needs, and also the reserves of critical raw materials and energy resources. So this is more or less the general framework.
Okay, thank you. So if we want to consider both scenarios, what would be the main cost for the European Union, and which European policies will be affected the most in both scenarios?
Yeah. For starting, we have to make a consideration and pay attention on one thing, that we are considering the costs on the EU budget with the current rules. But at the same time, it is unlikely that new member states will join the European Union before the end of the current multi-annual financial framework, the EU budget, that will expire at the end of 2027. So we are trying to consider the costs in the future, in the next MFF, the 2028-2034, that will have different rules and that it is currently under negotiation. So we have to make this distinction, but we trying to have a discussion and analyzing the costs. So we consider the current rules and also what could happen if some rules would change in the next MFF. So to sum up, considering both scenarios, the main costs would fall on the common agricultural policy and on the cohesion policy, which together account for almost 2/3 of the current EU budget. And this because the integration of relatively low income economies would pay pressure on existing financial frameworks of the current EU members. And some current member states would become from net beneficiaries to net contributors. So if we consider both scenarios, and especially a big bang expansion, so covering all 9 candidate countries, the funding for cohesion policy would increase from 393 billion euros to 422 billion. So this is more or less the indication, the estimates we can make, with current member states receiving 32 billion euros less. Funding, and this is for the cohesion policy, funding under the common agricultural policy would rise from 379 billion euros to 491 billion, with spending for current member states that would remain unchanged, and almost all of the 113 billion euros that would be allocated for the vast majority to accommodate Ukraine's agricultural sector. So this is the cost that we can make. So the main effect will be on these 2 policies.
Thank you, Federico, for this introduction that was very clear and exhaustive. And also thank you for mentioning the MFF, because it's something that I would like to go deeper, but later when we will have all the clear scenario. And regarding the cohesion policies, as you mentioned, I have a question for Anna, because I know that, Anna, you already dealt with this topic very well. If we want to consider only the scenarios toward the Western Balkans, as Federico said, the enlargement does not seem to threaten the overall sustainability of the cohesion policies. But a question that may arise when we talk about Western Balkans, if the local administration will have the capacity to absorb all the possible funds from the cohesion policies, whether governance reform will be required, because we already have had example of delaying. I'm thinking about Bosnia and Herzegovina with the reform agenda and so on. So from an internal perspective, from the Western Balkans, what do you think it would be possible to have as a scenario?
So I would just add on what Federico said. So if we just focus on the Western Balkans, as also you mentioned, I don't see a big issue for the sustainability of EU cohesion policy. So the impact would not be that drastic, and we wouldn't see a huge shift from net beneficiaries to net contributors, because the size of the Western Balkan countries is not that big. Additionally, if we think about the enlargement, we see lately the narrative of the front runners and the Montenegro and Albania, and we would not expect the enlargement to happen all at once at the Western Balkans. So the increase would be therefore gradually. But a bigger issue, as you already mentioned, is exactly the ability of the Western Balkan countries to absorb all the funds. If we make a comparison between the money that the Western Balkan countries are receiving now under the IPA, so we pre-accession funds, so we see that these amounts are around 4 times lower than the estimation that we made for the Western Balkan countries under this MFF framework. So there is for sure, let's say, a fear that if we would get an access to these funds, we would not be able to absorb them. Of course, we have example like Bosnia and Herzegovina that is really having huge issues in terms of complicated political structure and complicated administrative procedures that are a consequence of this complicated political structures. But I would not limit the issue only on, let's say, Bosnia. I think that these issues are present throughout the region and even among the front runners. I think that some alternative approaches and some alternative ideas about the access to the funds and increased access to the funds could actually help deal with these issues. And I believe you're familiar with the TAP's stage accession model and the proposal of the gradual accession to gradual, increase of the funding. So if the funds would increase gradually, and if they would be tied to different administrative and political reforms, then the absorption capacity would increase already in the pre-accession process, and not when the countries would become members.
Yes, I know that Belgrade was the first one to propose this model of stage exception, and also in CeSPI we already mentioned this kind of proposals. But the question that may arise is if this kind of approach, this performance-oriented model that bind the fundings to the results, can maybe on the one hand, it may encourage reforms, but maybe on the other hand, it could penalize the most fragile system, and the risk is to have this already existing disparities even larger. So, I don't know if the stage accession model can comprehend also this.
Yeah, that is not something that is being dealt with in the stage accession model. But what I think is that when designing such, let's say, merit-based and result-based increase in finances and models, we need to be very careful to not design them in a way that they're let's say all or nothing. So we need to have we need to make them more gradual. So they need to favor incremental progress, because otherwise what you already mentioned, that we would punish the systems that are let's say the most sensitive, the weakest. We would punish those systems. So the design of this kind of merit-based models should be such that it actually builds a framework for guiding reforms, and not penalize the countries that are slower in the reform process, because the speed of the reform process also depends on your initial position, and how the administrative and political capacities are at the moment when you start. So if we would punish the weakest at the very beginning, they would lack during the whole process. So a broader framework for encouraging and motivating reforms is something that is necessary at this point. Unfortunately, I don't have some very bright and overall solution for this problem, but definitely something that gives a broader framework, not okay, we give you money if you do something big. So incremental progress is what should be rewarded, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Anna. And I know that also Federico mentioned this problem in his paper, so maybe he wants to add something to what Anna said.
Yeah, I agree to what Anna said, and I think that we can find this approach also in the proposal, the Commission proposal of the next MFF, so the 2028-2034 MFF, where we see a performance-based funding model. So the disbursement of EU resources, and this is not concerning only candidate countries. This is mainly for EU members. So new members joining the European Union would be included in this model. So the disbursement of EU resources would be linked to the compliance with the rule of law standards and the achievement of reform milestones. So in this intention for all members of the European Union, including potential new members, this idea is to push the governance reforms by ensuring that funds lead to tangible results in the end. There is, of course, a legitimate risk that such a model could penalize some countries, for example, countries, new members or current members that lacks institutional capacity, for example, to plan, to manage, or to account for large inflows of capital. But at the same time, a staged approach, an incremental approach could help to release proportionally, in proportion to the administrative capacity that a member can demonstrate. And this somehow would also bridge, or it would help to bridge the development gaps while avoiding also the risk of weaker public administration. This in the idea of the Commission and in the proposal of the European Commission that we have to remind that is still under negotiation. We don't know what would happen.
So talking about the new multi-annual financial framework for 2028-2034, what are the main proposals, if you can underline maybe better, what are the main proposals and why it's different from the previous one, and why it can maybe represent a credible response for all the challenges that we are discussing?
Well, the next MFF would address not only the external it will not change only the external funds, the idea of the disbursement of funds for the external policies and areas, but also in the internal areas. So policy areas like agriculture or cohesion policy would be merged, according to the proposal of the Commission, into one single envelope that is called national and regional partnership plans. So in this single envelope would be one plan for each country. This means that every country will decide the amount of resources that will be given to each policy area, with earmarking, of course. So this is why we have to pay attention on the cost of the enlargement, because actually current member states could face a decrease of funding in, I don't know, like in agriculture, regardless for new members to join the European Union. For example, we can take France and agriculture in France. So if Paris decide that in the next, in its national plan and regional plans, less resources will be given to agriculture, this will not depend on new members to join. So this is the general framework that we have now currently under negotiation, and that will be, that also new members will have to apply in the case they will join the European Union in the next budgetary period. So this is more or less the general framework that we have to take into consideration when we talk about cohesion policy and common agricultural policy.
Yes, and I think that now we could address the big topic of the CAP, because as you mentioned, that while the impact in the case of the Western Balkans will be kind of manageable, the main issues when we talk about Ukraine is the structural pressure that it may pose to the common agricultural policies. Maybe also, Federico, if you want to give a brief introduction to this topic, but also I'm more interested in discovering how maybe it can be a lever, an opportunity to reform, to go toward a more sustainable model for the common agricultural pressure policy that is still receiving some critics, over the years. So I would like to listen to Federico and then Anna again.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the agricultural impact of the Western Balkans would likely remain manageable, also considering the small scale nature of the sector in this region, while Ukraine, which with its roughly 40 million hectares of fertile land, could claim a disproportionate share of the budget under the current rules, of course, and potentially provoking political tensions and also farmer protests, and we across the EU, and we saw here in Brussels and in the capitals what happens when farmers protest. And also, as you mentioned, at the same time, this pressure in the next MFF could be also a catalyst for reforming the overall structure of the common agricultural policy, of course, under new rules. Because if we have to imagine Ukraine joining the EU and joining this policy area, we have to consider not only the impact, but how the resources should be redistributed among the member states. And this could bring to a more sustainable model also of this policy area and of how the resources are distributed among member states. So moving away from subsidies primarily based on land ownership and shifting more to a system that rewards the provision of public goods. So such as carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, sustainable water management, and always remembering that the disbursement of funds are linked to the reforms, so the implementation of reforms in this area. So in this way, the European Union could prevent Ukraine's mega farms from capturing too many resources. At the same time, also ensuring that stable incomes for small-scale farms across the current 27 member states and also new member states that are not Ukraine.
Thank you, Federico. Please, Anna, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. I mean, I think Federico explained everything very well, so there is not much to add, but I would like to say that no matter that from analytical perspective, and when we are talking now about that, the reforms that could be started with the Ukraine joining CAP, they seem very reasonable. They seem very good and very logical, and very how to say in favor of some good changes in agriculture in Europe. I am scared that the way how to say the policies, the way they are structured now, we already know who are the beneficiaries. So the structure of beneficiaries is already well established, and I'm not sure that changing some of the rules in order to accommodate Ukraine will be enough for some of them, if you understand what I wanted to say. So maybe the resistance might be stronger than that. I mean, we've seen how farmers are protesting, and what they're I mean, some of their issues might be also resolved with such reforms, but on the other side, if we are I don't know, if we go for lowering the support for large firms, large firms may not go to the streets on their tractors and make protests, but they will lobby very harshly on the other side, behind the closed doors. So I'm not sure how easy these negotiations will be.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. By the way, now that we address all the critical points, I would like also to introduce some positive externalities, not to make this conversation too tough to handle. So both for the Western Balkan countries and for the European Union itself. Because on the other hand, from the Western Balkans country, there are many that that are really confident in the Europeans' ability to export stability and a sort of legal predictability to support political reforms and so on. But also inside the European Union, there are the ones who are really supporting the enlargement in the sense that it can increase investment opportunities, but also industrial goal when we talk about strategic autonomy. So if you, Anna, can start to give us some positive externalities and some positive sides of the enlargement from both sides. So what will be the main benefits for both sides?
I believe the benefits are outweigh the costs for both sides. I mean, I also they kind of are harder to see, especially when we are talking about this in the context of the budget. It's much easier to see that the Western Balkan countries are net beneficiaries, and they would get more from the EU budget and then they would contribute. But what is not being seen is, first of all, you mentioned the geographical position of the Western Balkan countries. So we are surrounded by the EU countries. So the transportation, the railway networks, the infrastructure networks, they could, let's say, blend us in. And that would not make the transportation easier only for the Western Balkan countries, but also for the EU countries that are in our neighborhood. Trade is the obvious benefit, and the increase in the trade, because for the Western Balkan countries, the EU countries are the main economic partners. So, for example, for Serbia, that's Germany and Italy. For other Western Balkan countries as well. So when we eliminate the constraints for deeper integration and deeper economic relations, deeper trade relations, then the benefits can manifest themselves. So they're way harder to quantify. We need to imagine them before the accession happens, but they're there in front of us. Another benefit could come from the labor market perspective, but that has to be managed very well and thought through before making some huge steps, because we know the issues of the brain drain in the region and very unfavorable demographic situation. But also that issue can be resolved with increasing the living standards in the region. Some of the people living in the EU might return, as it happened also in some EU countries. It's happening right now in Poland, for example. A lot of Polish immigrants, they returned back to Poland after years of increased economic collaboration between Poland and the rest of the EU, and increased living standards thanks to that. And finally, for the region, it's also and maybe the most important and the most, let's say, the hottest topic right now, so the rule of law. And with the improved rule of law, with improved transparency, we will have better functioning administrations, and thanks to that, also better functioning economies in the region.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna. And Federico, I remember that we were discussing this point in particular for the labor market, because it's important to find a balance to open the market and to ensure, of course, the freedom of movement, but also not to affect too much the already existing problem of brain drain. And that, of course, in the short period, it will get worse. We already know the trend, how it goes. But what do you think? How could we address the topic? And if you want to add something to what Anna said.
Yeah, I think that for the Western Balkans, Anna explained everything very well and exhaustively. Yeah, I think that we have to consider both the short-term issues but also the long-term benefits, both for the Western Balkans and Ukraine and for the European Union. So, of course, the integration of both regions, so Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans, in the European Union would help the overall security of the European Union, but security not only in military sense, but of course economically, in the agricultural sector, in the energy sector. So we have to consider how these could help both parties. At the same time, from the European Union perspective, the experience from previous enlargement waves demonstrated that EU funding tends to crowd in substantial volumes of private capital, particularly from geographically proximate member states. So we could expect that in the Western Balkans could flow private capitals from Austria, for example, from Italy, from Croatia, from Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and in Ukraine from Poland, from Eastern Europe and Central Europe. So we have to consider how the private capitals would flow into the regions. And also what kind of benefits they could bring to the European Union, not only what benefits the European Union can bring to these regions, but also the benefits these regions can bring to the European Union. And for example, I would go for Ukraine. One thing that we tend to forget about Ukraine is the fact that, of course, in the short term, there will be direct costs for the European Union budget. But at the same time, if we consider the reconstruction needs of Ukraine, these, for example, could become a growth engine also for the current European Union member states, because the reconstruction would generate long-term demand for steel, engineering, digital services, and also EU companies would invest more in the reconstruction, so they will be involved in the reconstruction of Ukraine. They would have more revenues and they will pay more taxes in their respective member states. So more tax revenues in the current member states would mean an absorption of the direct cost that member states had to face in the EU budget. So when considering what benefits the regions can bring to the European Union, we don't have to forget the long-term scenario and the long-term perspectives.
Yes, thank you, Federico, for mentioning also the reconstruction in Ukraine. It's really important also because in CeSPI we already addressed this topic and we made a comparison with what happened in Bosnia, for example, for the reconstruction in Bosnia and Herzegovina after the war. And I really think that all the opportunities around reconstruction, not only in terms of economics, but it also in terms of the support to civil society movements and democracy and so on, are really wider than we expect. So this is not a malus. It's often seen as a negative externalities, but it may lead to other opportunities. So thank you so much also for mentioning this. Thank you to both of you for this really enlightening discussion. I think that we touched all the points that I wanted to address. I would like to conclude before leaving the floor to maybe some questions from the audience. I would like to conclude with some general consideration from the both of you. For example, what are the most urgent and necessary policy intervention, both at the European Union level and the Western Balkans level, Ukrainian level, so the national levels, to enhance the credibility of the accession process, but also to prevent some political polarization that may arise. Who's going to go first?
I can take this one. So I would say that it is necessary to in some way restore the credibility, and I think that EU has more responsibility, or not only responsibility but more opportunity to do so. So it has to give clearer and more predictable accession pathways to the candidate countries. And to do so, it could do it through linking reforms to some tangible benefits. For example, the gradual access to some of the EU programs and funding, single market, and so on. So some sort of accession before accession in some ways, gradual integration, stage accession models, some of these ideas that are coming from either from the EU institutions or the civil society of the candidate countries. There is a lot of alternative and interesting approaches that they could consider and actually put into action. They did make some steps also with the growth plans, and that was a good change. But what is important is that the progress becomes visible for the citizens, the progress in the accession process, and even before they acquire the full membership. Additionally, for the side of the EU, it's important to remain consistent. So there should not be some shifting signals in their political actions or some bilateral blockages that we've seen in the past. On the other side, at the national level, the governments, they need to go way beyond just formally ticking the box and just saying, okay, we've changed this law, we've done this and we've done that in the accession process. They really need to show like genuine commitment that they want to make those reforms, and they want the changes that are made on paper, they want to see them applied in institutions and the governance in these countries. So I think, yeah, those are the three main points for the EU and at the national level. And when I say the national level, I mean, I mostly talk about the Western Balkan countries because we are in this enlargement process for too long. Citizens are getting exhausted. Also at the let's say operational level, people who are working in some institutions, they are also getting exhausted. So there should be something that will move the needle and finally make the change in this region.
Thank you, Anna, for these insights. Absolutely. And now, Federico, if you want to conclude.
Yeah, I think that when we discuss about policy intervention that are required both on the EU and national levels, we have to start with what I mentioned before. So looking at the fiscal and reframing, not only looking at, but reframing the fiscal costs in the short term as a seed capital. So a sort of high return public investment. So there will be short-term costs, but at the same time, we have to pay attention more on the long-term gains. And this is applicable both for the EU and the national governments and public debates in the candidate countries. Also to demonstrating that enlargement may strengthen the national budgets despite the immediate costs for the current member states and for the candidate countries. Second, more on the EU side, I think that future accession treaties should incorporate robust transitional provision and gradual phasing periods for market access and direct payments, and these especially for Ukraine, because such mechanism would help shield economic sector in the current member states from potential economic shocks, as we saw, for example, for agriculture. And finally, policymakers, I would say more in the candidate countries, but also in the current member states, must address the risks associated with brain drain and asymmetric labor mobility, as you mentioned before. And this requires prioritizing investment in local human capital so that the new member states in the moment they will join the European Union, achieve real economic convergence with the rest of the European Union.
Okay. Thank you to the both of you. I think it was a really rich conversation and really interesting one. So thank you for all the insights that you gave to us. I will now leave the floor to some questions from the public. I can see that there is already a question for the one who wants to reply. So, do you foresee a role for the new democracy promotion mechanism, such as Agora EU for the Western Balkans, under the new MFF? Maybe, I don't know if Federico.
I can take it, yeah. Well, yes, of course, there will be, we have to pay attention on Agora EU and other instruments that are included in the new MFF. At the same, I mean, these for strengthening the civil societies and public opinions in the candidate countries as well as in the current member states. At the same time, it is difficult to link these to the budgetary costs of enlargement, of new wave of enlargement, especially in the main policy areas like agriculture and cohesion policy, because they are included in different envelopes. So what would happen with the national and regional partnership plans would be very different from all the rest. So of course, the new MFF could strengthen with this new instrument also the civil society in the new member states or in the potential new member states or candidate countries. At the same time, I think that we also have to pay attention on what happens with the main core of the EU budget, that is the new plans.
Thank you, Federico. Anna, do you want to add something to this, or we can go on?
You can continue with the next
Okay.
question.
Let me see if we have other questions from the public, and maybe. So we had a really dense discussion, and I know that the topic could be a bit tricky because it was really technical, and I know that the economy can be a bit tough sometimes, but I think that you both managed to be extremely clear. So thank you again. We have another question. How do you assess the Rama Vučić proposal to only join internal market and let go of veto powers? Maybe, Hannah, now I will give you the floor to you, just to be
Yeah, so CEP's
Mhm.
proposal on staged accession had something similar, let's say, but as a temporary phase, let's say, for a country. But to have it as a permanent solution, I don't think it's a fair solution for the new members, because that's what would make that was actually for the proposal that CEP made, was one of the main critics, that it could make the two-class membership. And our argument was always that this is just a temporary situation, but if it remains permanent, then we actually have the two-tier membership in the EU, and I'm not sure how aligned that is with the EU values and what EU represents and what EU wants to represent. So I would say that it's not the best solution for the current situation.
Sure. Also, joining the internal market will guarantee
Joining the
all
internal market is great. Is great. It's
Yeah,
a great push
all
for
the-
absolutely. But that's not a membership what they suggested, and it's not a permanent solution. It's a temporary solution, I would say. most of the benefits that we were talking about, that I was talking about earlier, would come from joining the EU market, for the Western Balkans, but also for the EU. But maybe that would also give more maneuver space to politicians in the Western Balkans to do what they usually do also now. So maybe that's exactly why they propose something like that.
No, also because for the citizens from the Western Balkans, having a full membership is not only a matter of economic benefits,
Yes.
but first and foremost of democracy support mechanism, as we already said.
Rule of law and yes.
Rule of law. So it will be not really a great compromise. But we kind of discussed already these veto power issues that it made. I don't think that this is me. It will take too long to discuss now, but maybe Federico, you can just give us some insight about the veto powers, because we already discussed maybe the necessity to rethink about this model. So Federico, if you just want to add something really shortly about basing on this proposal.
Yeah, I totally agree with Anna. I mean, if it's something temporary, of course, it could be also included in the accession treaties, but it is not the proposal they made. And if it becomes something, permanent, this would go against the EU values. And we have to remember that there is no appetite at all in the Council to reframe the accession process at all. So, I mean, this would need a real push from a substantial core of EU member states that we don't see at the moment, especially because we also have to consider how the unanimity works. So if we don't have all on board, this would just not happen. So I think that being part of the single market is important, but it is important as a part of the membership of the European Union. And of course, in the accession treaties, there could be provisional measures and temporary periods in which you can be part of something integrally or partially. So there are creative solutions that can be found in the accession treaties, but all these conditions are temporary. So I think that this is the starting point, and also, I think also the finish line.
I think that we can all agree on this point. We have another question. From an economic perspective and MFF, do you think that EU treaty change is needed to accommodate the integration process of Western Balkans, 6, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia?
I would say that regardless of my opinion, I think that a treaty change is not foreseen for the moment, in the sense that also treaty change requires unanimity again. So I don't see it coming at all. On the economic level, I don't think there is a need to a treaty change, as much as the EU budget, the proposal, I mean, not the proposal, but the negotiation for the new budget also consider the real perspective that new members join the European Union. If a treaty change is for political reasons, so considering that with more members, so 30, 35 members, it will be very difficult to manage the unanimity rule. This is one topic. But from the economic point of view, I think this is not needed, as much as we are aware that in the period of 2028, 2034, we could be more members, and the resources should be redistributed once new members join. We don't know how many members, which members, but there should be, of course, provisions that if new members join, we know what to do.
the European instruments already are already giving room for movement for these kind of adjustments and movement, also outside the scenario of a treaty change. Okay, Anna, do you want to add something to this question?
I think Federico explained very in detail everything, so
okay. Thank you. So I think maybe no more questions for the moment. So thank you again to Anna and Federico. Thank you for everyone who joined the discussion and stayed with us until this moment. It was really interesting. And as I already said, you can find the Federico Baccini's paper on both CeSPI and EFDS website in the next few days, and I hope that we will have further occasion to discuss together this topic, or even more insights that we received that can open the discussion to other contributions. So thank you all, and I think that we can declare the webinar concluded.